Hello again. Welcome for the last talk of the morning before we can go for our lunch. So thanks for staying here. We are going to discuss today with Valerio Ciotti, and he's going to discuss about hunting unicorn with network analysis. So Valerio is a lead data scientist at the moment at ABN AMRO, and together we are going to explore the network construction methodology with a very practical example, because we are going to apply it to a specific case, which is going to be how to rank early stage startup. So please make some noise for Valerio.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me today. It's been a big fan of PyData since 2015, where I attended in London my first PyData, and then I'm proud that 9 years after I'm here speaking. It's a big achievement. Also, thank all of you for joining me today for this talk on hunting unicorns with network analysis. Before we start, just let me reassure you that no unicorns were hurt during this research. Before we jump in, a quick introduction of myself. I'm Valerio Ciotti. I'm just going to repeat a little bit. I'm the lead data scientist in ABN AMRO. Also manage the data science team there. Before that, I worked as a senior data scientist at Barclays and at a company called FX Compared. Over the last few years, I also did some consultancy for various VC funds. I have a background in physics, PhD in applied mathematics, where I actually studied complex network analysis, in particular complex network, the social network analysis and the network of startups, which I'm going to present today. So actually, this work is based on past research that I did during my PhD. If you'd like to know a little bit more about myself, here are some links, and you can also look at online. There is an interview that I gave on Wired UK about this work. So I know this is the toughest probably slot of the day, because I'm the only thing between you and your lunch. But if your attention span is of 5 minutes, this slide should got you covered for the rest of the 25 minutes. So first of all, what did we do in this work? We put forward the hypothesis that startup success is connected with the knowledge transfer between companies. And we wanted to capture this by creating a global network of startups, where each node represents a company, and a connection between two companies exists if there was a transfer of knowledge between one company to the other. Then, since we're dealing with a network, we use network analysis and network centrality measures to assess the likelihood of a startup long-term success at an early stage. The results show that we can double the performance of venture funds for early-stage companies. And another interesting thing is that this methodology could really help venture capitalists to have a more data-driven way to assess companies, to assess early-stage companies. So, if you're still with me, this is the roadmap of today's talk. I'll start by outlining the problem that we try to solve, introduce the hypothesis behind the startup success, what we come up with, and then give you an introduction to network-based methodology, show some results, provide some practical deliverable, and then finally wrap up with some conclusion. I want to start with a very quick experiment. Close your eyes and think of a startup. And my question for you is, what do you see? Do you see a magical place where everyone wants to work to, where innovation thrives, where cutting-edge technology is used, where people get rich and living happy ever after? If that's the case, raise your hand. Great. One person, great. Well, and reopen your eyes if you didn't have them open. Well, that's really not the case, unfortunately, because in reality, 90% of startups fails within 5 years from their foundation. And only a handful of them becomes unicorn, and there is a reason why we call them unicorns. This high failure rate is often due to the difficulties of assessing those companies. And why is that so complicated? Well, there are many reasons. One of them is that those companies, by definition of being early stage, do not have any data. They don't have data on growth or on their revenue because they have no revenue most of the time. Second one is that the traditional business evaluation methods are based on historical data, so they are not applicable for those companies. And the third one is that venture capitalists use usually a very handmade methodology to evaluate those companies, which is very subjective. It's full of biases, time-consuming, and most of the time doesn't really work out that well. So when we started this project, we tried to think about what are the ingredients of the success of a startup. And we come up with two things, which are the two things that every startup starts with. One of them is the idea that the startup wants to sell, and the team behind the idea, which are those 4 or 5 people that usually starts the company. Most of the time nowadays, we don't even have like a building. Those companies, those startups, are really like 4 people creating, trying to make this idea work. But those two ingredients do not have the same weights. In fact, you may have a great idea, but not that great team, and your idea will never see the light of day. But you can have a great team, an average idea, and probably your startup, your company, will see many years of activity. So the first thing that we come up with was that we want to find a way to measure like the success throughout the people that are composing the startup. So, and why people are so important for the success? Well, we are a combination of past experience. And in the same way, when people move from company to company, it's like they're bringing with themselves all the knowledge, all the know-how, all the skills. So it's like a real toolbox from company to company. And the new company that the person joined will really benefit from all the past experience that this person has accumulated over time. So we want to think, we thought about, okay, how can we try to really capture this dynamic of knowledge flow across companies? And the most natural thing to do is actually using a network, and where you look at companies as nodes, and the knowledge flows between those companies. How did we build this network? So we use the CrunchBase dataset, which is a sort of LinkedIn for startups, but also it also contains established companies inside it. We cleaned the dataset. We were left with 26 years of data, 36,000 people, 284,000 organizations across 117 countries. And then from this data, what we did was we built a bipartite network, which is nothing more a fancy word to say that you have 2 types of nodes. In one side, the employees, on the other side, the companies. And then you connect employees to companies that they worked in. You don't create connection between nodes of the same type, so no employee or company, but you only connect people, the 2 different type of nodes. And after that, to create the network of companies, of startups, we connect 2 companies if at least one person was working in both companies. Let me give you a very quick example. And here, Eve, for example, was working at company 8 and company 7, but also on company 4. So when we look at the network of companies, company 8, 7, and 4 are connected with one another. This is a nice little example, but what if we try to visualize the actual network that we built? In this network, each node represents a company, and each connection represents the movement of one person between the two companies. The timeline is monthly, from 1990 to 2015. The size and the color reflects the number of outgoing connection of a node. Sorry, and for some reason, it doesn't stop to the last frame. But as we saw, there is like a time-evolving network. So every month, new companies are added, and new links are added based on the birth of new company and based on the movements of people across companies. So we wanted to test this hypothesis. Is there a positive correlation between a startup position in the network and its future success? The problem here is that discussing position of a node in a network is something quite abstract, because you can reassign the position of nodes in this, of the same network in different ways, but the properties of the network would be the same. So it's like really those nodes are floating into a non-defined metric space. Mathematically also, a network is closer to an infinite dimensional lattice. That's for example, for percolation theory and percolation properties. But what we can do, we can assess how well those companies, those nodes, are connected with one another. And we can do that using the centrality measures. And the most famous centrality measure that probably everyone used or is still using, to be honest, I'm not anymore sure, every day, it's the PageRank, which was developed 30 years ago by Larry Page and Sergey Brin to rank the web pages of the internet. So the idea is that as they manage to rank all the websites using Google, we want to use the same strategy to actually rank all the companies that we have. So now what we want to do is we want to, for each time frame of our network, we want to rank all the companies available. And we want to avoid leaking any future information. And that is done by just looking at every timestamp, just really rank things at a specific, in this case, per year, month, pair. Then, first thing you have to do, like Sergey Brin and Larry Page were doing, you rank all the companies available at that time, not just the startups, because that's what the network is like. And then what we need to do is we want to select only the companies that are startups. So we need to have a criteria to define what a startup is. And the criteria that we come up is that a startup is defined by if those two conditions are met. So it's a company that is less than 2 years old and is also pre-seeded, so it didn't receive any funding. This is quite important because the moment a company receives a funding, it's not anymore, I'd say, an open deal for an investor. It doesn't get anymore a big piece of the pie. But at the same time, there is also some subjectivity on the value of the company provided by the actual investor. So if we don't consider this, we are not also considering any bias in our analysis. Using these two conditions, for example, we could select the company A, F, and R to be startups. They match the criteria. And what we do, we rescale, and we use a rescale ranking, where now company A is the first, company F is the second, company R is the third. Now, if we repeat this process many times for every timestamp, we will end up with this table where each column is a month-year pair, And each row represents a company ranked by their page rank, for example. But now, we said at the beginning that we have the hypothesis that we want to evaluate if this ranking gives us any insights on the future success, on the long-term success of those companies. So for that, we need a definition of what a successful company is. And again, for this one, we come up with three, mostly because of also lack of data, I would say, but with these three possible outcomes, which if at least one is satisfied within X years from the prediction, from the ranking, then the company it's assumed to be successful. So the three conditions gets acquired, so it is done an exit, or it goes public, which means undergone an IPO, or showed a significant growth that managed to acquire another company as well. So then what we can do is we can replace the name of companies with a simple binary value, 0 and 1. I guess you might imagine what the 1 and the 0 represents in this case. And finally, to measure the actual success rate of this ranking, what we can do is we can divide the number, we can look at the top 10, sum the number of ones, divided by 10, and you get the number at the bottom. You can do this for the top 10, top 20, top 50, whatever top you like to look at. And in this example, you have the list of successful startups within 7 years, for example, for the rankings date. And then, if we plot the success rate over time, we get this blue line, which represents the top 20 companies that aims for a success within 7 years. On the y-axis, you have the success rate expressed in percentage. On the x-axis, you have the time. And like it was said during the talk this morning at the keynote, I can't remember the name, I would say Melanie, but I'm not sure. We need to have a benchmark to evaluate how our performance, our metric is performing. And to do that, we use the expected value of the hypergeometric distribution, considering all the company available at that time, the number of successful companies, and picking 20 of them for this case. If you do not know what the hypergeometric distribution expected value should look like, it's very simple. Imagine that you have a bag of marbles, 1,000 marbles, 900 of them are blue, 100 of them are red. You pick 20, you look at how many red marbles do you have. You repeat this process many times. And then you have the expected value of red marbles, in our case, of success. And this is plotted on the black line. As you can see, the methodology shows that we are always performing better than the random value, except for the two cases of the financial crisis, the dot-com bubble and the 2007 financial crisis, which also makes sense because investors are very more adverse to the risk in those periods, so they don't tend to invest that much. And at the same time, people do not have any more maybe money or job to even start fundraising their own company or start something more risky and go by themselves. We can also summarize all the blue line values by reporting these values on the right-hand side. As you can see, for the top 20, we reach almost a 30% success rate, which means that on average, 30% of the startup ranked end up to be successful within 7 years. Obviously, those values may change based on the number of years that you look ahead. The longer you wait, the higher it is. The shorter you wait, the lower it is. And just for a comparison, an average venture capital fund that is focused on early stage companies performs like 15% for the top 20 on average. So we managed to actually double the performance. You may wonder if we managed to find some interesting startups with this approach before they receive any funding, and the answer is yes. First one is WhatsApp. We managed to rank among, I think the top 20 was the 18th position, and it was before they received any funding from Sequoia Capital. Unfortunately, we only did that in the past, and if I had this information before, I was not here probably talking at PyData, but enjoying a lifelong holiday. The second one is Siri, which I don't know how many of you are aware, but it was not developed by Apple, but was acquired by Apple, and now it's under development by them, but something that I was not aware. Wish and Beyond Meat are two others that I actually did remember. But the most interesting part is that there are a lot of successful companies that we are not that famous, but still they may be like, they end up to be quite successful in the end. Now, before we wrap up, I want also to share with you some relevant deliverables, or like more concrete deliverables out of this project. First one is obviously for the venture capitalists. This methodology can really help investors to speed up their screening process by providing them with a short list of most likely to be successful companies. If you think about it, they look at the way they do now is they look at a large number of companies, they spend their time evaluating them. Imagine that if instead of looking at all possible companies, they have a short list of them, they can spend different time to actually evaluate those companies with also the hint of that some of them are most likely to be successful. This obviously doesn't replace at all the role of the investor, but should help them to really speed up their process. The second one is to build a more sustainable society, because when a startup fails, it's not just a failure of the investor or the CEO or the founder. There's also people that lose their job. So if investors, government can invest on companies that are more likely to succeed, you can imagine that there is a high, longer, people do not lose job that often in a sense. There is more, they can last much longer. So it's actually would be a good thing for also for the company that receive investment. And finally, there is a possibility to reuse the same approach to actually evaluate a new joiner, how the impact of a new joiner would like increase the ranking of your company. And knowing that the higher the ranking, the most likely there is like also a chance for success, that can be a way to really bring somebody new into your company. I built this deck with this take-home message, which is the first step of predicting long-term economic success for companies. We saw this potential correlation between startup success and their position of the network. But to be honest, while I was biking here, I realized that this is not the take-home message that I want you to bring with you. Is actually this one. The reason why I presented this work and the reason why I'm quite proud of this work is that we were quite simple. As you could see, we didn't use any machine learning model, any AI, any LLM, also because at the time there didn't exist even LLMs. But we started with a simple idea. We really investigated that idea. We tried to evaluate try to question ourselves if it made sense, and you end up with quite some robust result in the end. And I think what I would like you to remember is that try to go simple with your project. I think it was actually also Vincent yesterday had the same take-home message during his talk. It's important that try to make it simple, your problem. and then doubt in a constructive way your results. Before we conclude, I also want to acknowledge these two gentlemen that they started the discussion on this project some time ago. There was just an idea between Mario and Moreno. During the PhD, I worked with Moreno, which was my colleague and one of my best friends. We really spent our time to make this idea see the day of light, because we really, really believe in it. And so that was like very, very nice effort, to be honest. So I know that that's what you have in your mind right now, but if you want, I'm here to answer any questions, and thank you for your attention.
All right. My question is, isn't this like the way that you describe this closeness metric, right? It's basically saying how many employees have you got. Like, how is this different than just seeing how many employees are in a startup before they get funded?
Sorry, how many?
It seems to me like the metric that you're looking at, the closeness, because of the way that you set up your closeness ranking, is like a proxy for how many employees a startup has before it gets funding.
Not really, because what the idea is that to really understanding your position into the network. If you are closer to a big hub, let's say Google, Microsoft, Meta, whatever, your proximity to all other companies in the network is very different than if you are just connected with the periphery of that network with like small companies. And it also makes sense if you think about it. When you hire somebody, you look at their CV and you see names that resonates with you, at least in your field, or big names like Google and so on. You know that the experience that they're bringing is quite different from somebody that comes from companies that you never heard before. That's obviously sort of a bias, but it also makes sense in terms of the knowledge that you are bringing. So the point is, it's not just the number of employees, but is the quality of the connection that you are connected to. And also remember that the startups is something that is before seed in the analysis, and also it's less than 2 years old. And in that period, you don't have that many employees for a startup. Usually you have 2, 3, 5 people before receiving the first funding, the seed funding. So those are the key players most of the time for the core players for the success in the future.
So just small follow-up. So then it basically means that if you want to start a company, you should make sure that you have a group of people that comes from a couple of companies that are central in the network.
That could be a suggestion, but ideally it's people that have enough experience, yes. I think that's the key. If you have no experience, you are doomed to fail, to be honest. That's especially in this, like currently with all the startups that arises like from people who have great idea, no experience on even how to deal with a company, fails.
Thanks.
I think I already partially got an answer for my question as well, but I was wondering from like a practical point of view, like at what time do you decide then it's a good time to invest? Because the longer time, how do you say? You said like when it takes longer time, like in the evaluation, like the success rate is a bit higher?
Well, the problem is that if, because it's pre-seeded, and imagine that this methodology can be run today with companies that are pre-seeded. If you are interested in investing to the company, you need to do it, let's say you need to do your screening today to have a talk with the company before they receive anything. As I said, it could be a problem investing in a company as a second or a third because somebody already made their own evaluation of the value of the company, and the piece of the pie that you're going to get for the same price is going to be smaller or very unlikely larger. But yeah, so that's for the quickest, let's say, investors. You can also redo the same process by redefining the startups, so definition of startups. You can include only those that have 1 to 5 million seed value. Results will change. They can improve, but again, you are also adding some form of subjectivity of the investors, which we didn't want to touch it because it's subjective, and at least those are data that are clean in a sense.
Thank you. And one more small question, maybe you already answered, but where did you find the data?
On CrunchBase.
Okay.
It's like PitchBook, CrunchBase. They are like two of the biggest websites that have all this information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Really
good talk. I want to ask more about the variable selection. You chose to go with the team and how people are connected to base your success rate of a company. But were there any other variables, and how did you? This was
just this one. It's very. That's why I say like it's very simple analysis. It's really. It's like if you look at the LinkedIn of people and you look at where they worked. That's the only source of data that we use.
So I have a question about biases. So if you assume that in the tech industry there is some bias against an underrepresented group, and wouldn't this analysis or like this way of selecting a new startup like replicate these biases? So I think if you have like one group that is not well accepted to get into the big players and the big companies, and would then also not show up ever as a high rank. So I don't know, I think the term like boys club or so what comes to mind.
Sorry, you have to repeat because it's the sound is terrible for some reason.
Okay, sorry. So my question is if this analysis or this way of selecting a startup, if this wouldn't replicate biases that we could find in the tech industry. Like if you have a underrepresented group that is not, has troubles to get into the big players in the bigger companies, and those would have troubles then also receiving fundings because they don't have the right connections. And could you maybe also reverse this analysis to find these kind of hidden gems that would succeed even though they don't have the good connections?
Then it would not follow the hypothesis that we had at the beginning. So the question is how many of these hidden gems exist? It's something that I think for what we saw, all the biggest unicorns, at least, they are part of this of the network. Outside, it's very unlikely that you end up to explode like Google, Meta, OpenAI, whatever. That doesn't. It doesn't. We didn't see any, let's say, proof of that in that sense.
I mean, I think the question is like, how can you find the ones that didn't become successful because they didn't receive funding because of biases?
But I think no one becomes successful if they don't have a network. At least that's what we saw.
I mean, my question is like, is there maybe a relationship that either you have good people and the connections, or you have a very good idea?
Then you need to evaluate the idea, which we didn't consider. What you can consider is the market that you are the idea is exploring, and it's something which we didn't consider in this case, where maybe you can look at you can do the same analysis by filtering out, but again, you need to have the whole network, and you need to be part of the network, otherwise you will not be seen. So you may have. So again, it's like the first question. If you don't have the experience that you can be proved to be like reliable or strong enough, ideally you will not see your company to succeed in the end. That's what we saw.
I have a question about certain external factors that might influence the chance of receiving funding. Because do you take into account macroeconomic factors such as interest rates or market sentiments towards a certain industry? Because those can possibly highly influence the chance of receiving funding, right?
No, we didn't take any of them. The only thing we saw, because we are not looking at any causal effect, the only thing we look at or we observe is that during the two crisis, the methodology doesn't really work well. So obviously that can be an explanation of that. There was also recently a nice talk about the impact of the inflation and on how the investors' mentality works on that. So it's something that we're considering to do, like still, even if still try to work on this project, but it's something that it's worth to explore. Yeah, thank you.
Unfortunately, that was all the time we had for questions. If you have any questions for Valerio, feel free to approach him on the floor. So that was it for this session. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.